I am Camila, 20 years old, and my hands, though young, already know the rough feel of clay and the sweet scent of dried herbs. I was born and raised in a small village in Oaxaca where tradition and art intertwine in every fiber of our being. I always dreamed of bringing a piece of our culture to a bigger place. 2 years ago, with a heart full of hopes and a suitcase packed with handicrafts, I arrived in the bustling Mexico City. The capital welcomed me with its immensity, its noises, and an energy that promised opportunities for those who dared to seek them. My goal was clear: to set up my stall in a market and share the art of my people. I chose the Mercado de San Juan, a vibrant and chaotic place where colors, smells, and the voices of thousands of people mingle. Here, among stalls of exotic fruits and unusual meats, I set up my small corner. I offered hand-painted clay figurines, textiles embroidered with ancestral designs, and mixtures of medicinal herbs. At first, novelty overwhelmed me. Every sunrise in the market was an adventure. I would wake up before the sun, prepare my products with care, and display them with pride. I believed that the beauty and authenticity of my pieces would speak for themselves, attracting the curious and art lovers. However, reality soon showed its harsher face. My stall neighbors, with years of experience, seemed to have an invisible connection with customers. Their voices were heard, their products touched, while mine often went unnoticed. I watched as people stopped at other stalls, haggled happily, and left with their satisfied purchases. But when their gazes fell upon me, they often quickly diverted, as if my presence or my products were not worthy of attention. At first, I attributed it to customers not being used to my products or my inexperience as a vendor. I told myself I needed more time, that people would eventually realize the value of what I offered. Patience, I reminded myself, is a virtue. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, and the situation barely changed. My sales were minimal, barely enough to cover the stall rent and my basic needs. Discouragement began to creep in, a shadow threatening to extinguish my initial enthusiasm. Sometimes, an occasional customer would approach, ask the price of something, but rarely bought. I felt they looked at me with a distant curiosity, as if I myself were an exotic piece on display, but not a vendor from whom one could buy. My market colleagues, though not hostile, kept their distance. They were kind, but their conversations did not include me. I felt like a spectator in my own scene, observing market life from an invisible barrier that only I seemed to perceive. The loneliness amidst the crowd was a strange and heavy feeling. I tried to smile, to maintain hope, but each day that ended with few or no sales was a blow to my spirit. The energy that had brought me to the city began to falter. My products, which once filled me with pride, now seemed silent witnesses to my struggle. The vibrant colors of the embroideries and the delicacy of the figurines contrasted with the growing darkness in my heart. Was I not meant for this? I remember my grandmother's words, who always told me that art is a reflection of a soul, and that a pure soul will always find its way. I clung to those words, seeking strength in the wisdom of my ancestors not to give up. Despite everything, every morning I returned to the market with the same determination. I cleaned my stall, organized my products with the same care, and waited. I waited for a day when someone, finally, would see beyond my skin and my origins and recognize the value of my work. The aroma of dried chilies and fresh flowers filled the air, a mixture that for me was the smell of hope. Although indifference was constant, a small flame of faith continued to burn within me, waiting for the moment when someone would ignite its spark. Days passed, monotonous and filled with a routine that grew heavier and heavier. I opened my stall, arranged my crafts with the same dedication, but the customer's response remained the same, an almost palpable indifference. I watched Dona Elena, the tamale vendor next to me, how her husky voice and contagious smile attracted people. Or Don Pedro, the butcher, who with his pleasant chatter and jokes always kept his customers close. They were part of the market. I, on the other hand, seemed like an intruder. My attempts to strike up a conversation with passers-by were often met with a fleeting glance or a dry thank you. It was as if my Oaxacan accent or my simple attire made me invisible to most. One afternoon, an elegantly dressed woman stopped in front of my stall. My eyes lit up with hope. She leaned in to examine a clay figurine, but her gaze was not one of admiration, but of distant curiosity, almost condescension. "Where do these things come from?" she asked with a tone that didn't denote real interest, but rather an attempt to classify me. I enthusiastically explained the origin of the pieces, the ancestral technique, and the meaning of the colors. She merely nodded, without emotion, then added, "Oh, yes, from those villages. They're curious, but I don't think they'd match my decor." And with that, she walked away, leaving me with the figurine in my hand and the echo of her words in the air. These kinds of encounters became common. People seemed to view my products as mere ethnographic curiosities, not as valuable art or craft pieces. I felt they pigeonholed me, that my origin defined the value of my work, or the lack thereof. The silence of my stall contrasted with the constant bustle of the market. I heard laughter, lively haggling, the murmur of conversations. My voice, when I attempted a greeting, was lost in the cacophony, like a discordant note in an orchestra. Sometimes, I wondered if there was something wrong with me. Was it my way of speaking? My appearance? Or did I simply not fit into the dynamic of the big city? Doubt was a slow poison seeping into my confidence. My grandmother always taught me that dignity is not bought or sold, it is carried within. But in the market, I felt my dignity was being tested, questioned by every indifferent glance, by every customer who walked past. Days grew longer, and nights were a refuge for my tiredness and frustration. In my small rented room, I reviewed the day's sales, which were almost always zero, and wondered how much longer I could sustain the struggle. I thought about returning to Oaxaca, to the familiarity of my village, where my art was recognized and valued. But the idea of giving up, of admitting defeat, hurt me more than the loneliness of the market. I had come to succeed. I carefully packed away my crafts each night, as if they were treasures still waiting to be discovered. Each piece was a part of my soul, of my history, and I couldn't allow others' disinterest to devalue them. Hope, though faint, did not entirely extinguish. Perhaps I just needed to find the right way to present my story, to break that invisible barrier. But how do you break a wall made of glances and silences? The sun set over the market roofs, painting the sky orange and purple. Another day ended, and the question persisted, what more could I do to make my voice heard in this sea of indifference? Discouragement had become my constant companion. My sales weren't improving, and financial pressure was starting to suffocate me. I thought of my family in Oaxaca, of the hopes they had placed in me, and guilt gnawed at me. One morning, as I unpacked my figurines, I noticed Don Chewy, the old medicinal herb vendor from the stall opposite, watching me. Don Chewy was a man of few words, his face lined by time and a deep gaze. We had never spoken beyond a polite greeting. He was always busy with his infusions and remedies, but today his gaze lingered on my hands, which trembled slightly as I placed an embroidered hupil. "Your things are beautiful, girl," he said suddenly, his voice rough but not unkind. I startled, not expecting him to initiate a conversation. "Thank you, Don Chewy," I replied, feeling a blush on my cheeks. He added nothing more, just returned to his herbs. But that small comment, that simple phrase, was like a gentle breeze on a suffocating day. Someone had noticed my things, and not with condescension. In the following days, I began to observe Don Chewy more closely. His stall was modest, but he always had customers. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words were listened to with respect. I saw how people approached him not only for his herbs, but for his advice. He was a wise man, who listened more than he spoke, and offered solutions with a calm that inspired trust. One day, I dared to approach his stall during a quiet moment. "Don Chewy," I said timidly, "your customers trust you a lot. How do you do it?" He looked at me with his old, wise eyes. "People look for authenticity, Camila," he replied slowly as he ground some leaves. "They look for what is real, what has a history. And most importantly, they seek to feel seen, to feel their pain is heard." His words resonated within me. I was offering authenticity, history, but was I making my customers feel seen? Was I listening to what they truly sought, or just waiting for them to see what I offered? "Your hands tell a story, girl," Don Chewy continued, pointing to my figurines. "But sometimes, people need you to help them hear it. It's not enough to show, you have to tell." I became thoughtful. I had always believed that my crafts spoke for themselves. But Don Chewy suggested that I should be the voice of their story, the narrator of their origin, of their meaning. That night, I couldn't sleep. Don Chui's words spun in my head. It's not enough to show, you have to tell. How could I tell the story of my pieces in a way that would resonate with the people of the city? Perhaps the problem wasn't what I sold, but how I presented it. I had been so focused on visual beauty that I had forgotten the power of narrative, of emotional connection. The next day, I returned to the market with a new perspective. I observed people, not just as potential customers, but as individuals with their own stories, their own needs. I realized that many passed by because they didn't understand what they saw. My crafts were beautiful, yes, but their cultural significance, their creation process, was unknown to them. I decided it was time to change my strategy. I couldn't keep waiting for people to discover my treasures. I had to invite them to discover, to learn, to connect. The first spark of a new idea ignited in my mind. What if I created small cards, or even a small sign, explaining the story behind each type of craft? Don Chui's advice, though brief, had been a beacon in my darkness. He had given me direction, a new way to see my problem. The dignity of my art deserved to be told, not just exhibited. With Don Chui's words echoing in my mind, I felt revitalized. The idea of telling the story of my crafts filled me with an energy I hadn't felt in a long time. That same afternoon, after closing the stall, I dedicated myself to writing. I remember the stories my grandmother used to tell me about each embroidery, about the meaning of each color in the clay figurines. With my clearest handwriting, I began to create small labels and signs. Teotihuacan Hupil. Each thread tells the story of a family, a community, a millenary tradition. For the clay figurines, I wrote, Alabriges from San Martin Tilcaji, guardians of dreams and protectors of the spirit, hand-carved and painted with the soul of Oaxaca. The next day, with a bit of nervousness, I placed the signs at my stall. They were simple, handwritten, but I felt they gave voice to my creations. The first hour was as slow as ever. People continued to pass by. My heart sank a little, wondering if my new strategy would be as useless as the previous ones. But then, a young couple stopped. The girl, with blue-dyed hair and several piercings, read the Alabrige sign. Her expression changed from curiosity to fascination. "Look, Ricardo!" she exclaimed, pointing to the sign. "It says they are guardians of dreams. How incredible!" Ricardo, her partner, also came closer to read. I gathered my courage and approached them. "They are unique pieces," I said with a smile, each with its own spirit. "The artisans of my village believe they bring good fortune." The girl picked up a fox-shaped Alabrige, her eyes sparkling. "I love it. Do they really carve and paint them by hand?" I explained the process, the patience, the dedication. For the first time, I felt that someone not only saw the object but heard the story behind it. The conversation flowed, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel that invisible barrier. After a few minutes, the couple bought the fox Alabrige. It wasn't a big sale, but for me, it was an immense victory. It was the first echo of my voice in the market. The feeling of seeing them walk away with my Alabrige, with a genuine smile, filled me with deep joy. I had managed to connect. I had broken a small fragment of that wall of indifference. That day, other people stopped to read the signs. Some just read and moved on, but others stayed a little longer, and some even asked me questions. I felt that the air around my stall had changed, that a new energy was beginning to circulate. My crafts were not just objects. They were bearers of stories, of culture, of soul. The sun set, and as I packed up my things, a genuine smile spread across my face. Don Chui's advice had been gold. I had found a way for my hands to speak, and the market at last was beginning to listen. The small victory of the Alabrige gave me a surge of energy. Every morning, I arrived at the market with renewed optimism, watching how people interacted with my new signs. Although sales didn't immediately skyrocket, I noticed a subtle change. More people stopped, read the descriptions, and asked me questions. Curiosity was beginning to sprout. One day, an elderly woman, with a colorful rebozo and a kind gaze, approached my stall. "Girl, is it true that these embroideries are made on a backstrap loom?" she asked. I explained in detail the ancestral process, how the women of my village have woven with the same technique for centuries. Her eyes shone with recognition. "My grandmother also wove like that," she said nostalgically. It's an art that is being lost. How good that you bring it here. She didn't buy anything, but her approval was a balm for my soul. These small exchanges, these ephemeral connections, were more valuable than any sale. They made me feel that my work had a purpose, that I was sharing an important part of my heritage. I started talking more with customers, not just about the products, but about Oaxaca, about the festivals, the customs, life in my village. I shared anecdotes, and people responded with interest. I discovered that many city dwellers, although living in a big city, had a deep respect for the traditions and culture of Mexico's indigenous peoples. They just needed a door to access them. My stall, once a place of silence and solitude, began to fill with small conversations. The signs were the hook, and my stories, the bait that kept people interested. I learned to observe customers' expressions, to listen to their questions, and to adapt my answers. Not everyone was looking for the same thing, and my ability to connect depended on my empathy. One day, a foreign tourist, fascinated by the colors of a hupel, asked me about the meaning of the embroidered symbols. I explained that they represented the Zapotec worldview, the connection with nature. He bought the hupel, and as he left, he thanked me for the culture lesson. I felt immense pride. I had not only sold a garment, I had shared a piece of my world. My stall neighbors, who had previously ignored me, began to notice the change. Don Chuy gave me a smile of approval. Dona Elena, the tamale vendor, greeted me with more warmth. The atmosphere around me was transforming. I was no longer the silent foreigner. I was Camila, the girl from Oaxaca who told stories with her hands and her words. Sales, though still modest, began to increase steadily. I no longer lived with the anguish of not being able to pay the rent. I felt that the effort was finally bearing fruit. The afternoon sun bathed my stall with a golden light. I looked at my crafts, which now seemed to glow with new life. They were no longer just objects. They were bridges between cultures, between souls. The dignity of my work, which I once felt trampled, now stood strong. I had found my voice, and in doing so, I had begun to find my place in the bustling Mercado de San Juan. The streak of small victories and growing confidence was abruptly interrupted one morning. An arrogant-looking man, in a suit and tie, approached my stall. He wasn't a regular market customer, and his gaze was one of disdain. He stopped in front of my huipiles and, with a dismissive gesture, said, "This is pure junk. Who would buy these old, dirty things?" My words got stuck in my throat. I felt a burning in my cheeks and a knot in my stomach. It was the first time someone had attacked me, so directly and cruelly. "Sir, these are traditional handicrafts, handmade," I managed to say, my voice trembling. He let out a mocking laugh. "Traditional or not, they're in poor taste. You should sell something more modern." Humiliation flooded over me. I felt all the confidence I had built crumble in an instant. My eyes filled with tears, but I struggled not to let them fall. The man continued ranting, saying my stall lowered the level of the market, that my products were for Indians, and that I should go back to my village. His words were daggers. At that moment, a strong, clear voice interrupted the man. "Hey, you! What do you think you're doing?" It was Dona Elena, the tamale vendor, hands on her hips and a furious look. "Don't you see you're offending the girl? These crafts are art, and she's an honest worker." Dona Elena continued, her voice echoing down the market aisle. The man tried to retort, but Don Pedro, the butcher, also approached, his imposing figure casting a shadow over the aggressor. "Here we respect everyone, sir. If you're not buying, you'd better leave." Other vendors began to murmur and look at the man with disapproval. The atmosphere grew tense. The man, visibly uncomfortable with the attention, mumbled something and quickly walked away. I stood there, trembling, my heart pounding. The tears I had held back now flowed freely down my cheeks. Shame and gratitude mingled in my chest. Dona Elena approached me, hugged me tightly, and stroked my hair. "Don't mind him, Mija. Those people don't know what they're saying. Your work is beautiful, and you are a good person." Don Chuy, from his stall, nodded his head, a silent sign of support. The other vendors offered words of encouragement. Some even bought something from me to show their solidarity. That day, I didn't sell much, but I received something far more valuable, the acceptance and support of my market colleagues. I had faced discrimination head-on, and I was not alone. I realized that, Without knowing it, I had woven an invisible thread of connection with them. I was no longer the outsider. I was part of the community, one of the market family. The experience was painful, but also revealing. It showed me that dignity is not just an internal quality, but also something that is defended, protected with the help of those who value you. The incident with the arrogant man left a scar, but it didn't break me. On the contrary, it strengthened me. The solidarity of my market colleagues was a balm that healed the wound of humiliation. That night, in my small room, I didn't cry from sadness, but from gratitude. I realized that, without seeking it, I had found a family in the big city, a refuge in the bustle of the market. The next day, I returned to my stall with my head held high. My eyes were still a little swollen, but my spirit was stronger than ever. I wasn't going to let one person's ignorance define me. Dona Elena greeted me with a warm tamale and a smile. "We're here for whatever you need, Mija. Don't let it get to you." Her words were an embrace. Don Pedro winked at me and said, "Those people need to be stopped. Here we are working people, not prejudiced." I felt his support was a shield. The market people, seeing me, greeted me with more warmth, with a new familiarity. Some customers, who had witnessed the incident, approached to express their indignation and support. "Your work is beautiful, señorita," a woman told me as she bought a small embroidery. "Don't pay attention to people like that. The beauty of what you do speaks for itself." I realized that the incident, though painful, had served a purpose. It had exposed discrimination, but it had also revealed the kindness and fairness of the majority. My stall became a symbol of silent resistance. My crafts, once viewed with distant curiosity, were now appreciated with new respect as a testament to cultural richness. I began to speak more openly about my origin, about the difficulties faced by artisans from indigenous communities in bringing their art to the cities. People listened attentively. I no longer felt the need to hide my accent or my customs. On the contrary, I embraced them with pride. They were part of who I was, and they were the essence of what I offered. The resilience of clay, which is molded and hardened by fire, became my own metaphor. I had been shaped by adversity, and now I was stronger. Sales continued to increase, but now, each sale was accompanied by a deeper connection. Customers not only bought an object, they bought a story, a piece of Mexico. The market had transformed for me. It was no longer just a workplace, but a space for encounter, learning, community. I had found my place, not despite my origins, but thanks to them. The sun set, bathing the stalls in gold. I looked around, at the familiar faces of my neighbors, and felt a peace I had never experienced before. I had passed the test. The reputation of my stall began to grow beyond the confines of the Mercado de San Juan. Stories of my crafts and my resilience spread by word of mouth. One day, I received an unexpected call. It was from a popular art gallery in Coyoacán, one of the city's most bohemian and cultural areas. They had heard about my pieces. "We would like to exhibit some of your crafts, Miss Camila," said the voice on the other end of the phone. "We are interested in the authenticity and history that your pieces convey." My heart skipped a beat. A gallery. It was a dream I hadn't even dared to dream so soon. It was a recognition of the dignity and value of my art on a different level. I went to the gallery, bringing my best pieces, a specially embroidered hupel, several large alabrages, and some clay figurines with unique details. The owner, a kind woman named Sophia, examined them with admiration. "They are magnificent, Camila," Sophia said. "The quality, the colors, the history. This is what people are looking for. The authentic, what is soul?" We agreed on an exhibition. Sophia asked me to prepare a small description of my process and the origin of the pieces, so that visitors could understand the depth of each creation. I returned to the market with a mix of excitement and nervousness. I shared the news with Don Chuy and Dona Elena. Their faces lit up with pride, as if it were their own success. "Congratulations, Mija!" exclaimed Dona Elena, hugging me. "You deserve it. Your art is a blessing." Don Chuy nodded, his smile wrinkling his eyes. The news spread quickly among the vendors. Everyone congratulated me, encouraged me. I felt that the entire market community celebrated with me, like a big family. The exhibition at the gallery was a resounding success. My pieces received praise from critics and visitors. I sold several important works and received special orders. But beyond sales, the most gratifying thing was seeing people stop in front of my pieces, read the descriptions, and feel a connection with Oaxacan culture. I felt that my voice, and the voice of my people, was being heard on a broader stage. The dignity of my art, of my roots, was being recognized and celebrated. I remember my grandmother's words about art and the soul. Now, not only did my hands tell a story, but that story was resonating in the heart of the city. The path had been difficult, full of challenges and moments of despair. But every obstacle had taught me a lesson. Every tear had strengthened me. The success of the gallery exhibition opened new doors. Not only did my sales at the market increase, but I also received invitations to participate in art fairs and special markets. The demand for my crafts grew so much that I started having difficulty producing everything myself. I remember my family in Oaxaca, my cousins and aunts who were also skilled artisans. An idea occurred to me. What if I created a small workshop in the market, a space where I could work and, at the same time, teach others interested in Oaxacan art? I shared my idea with Don Chewy. He listened attentively, and then, with a smile, said, "It's a good idea, Camila. Sharing knowledge is planting new seeds." I found a small, unoccupied space near my stall, which used to be a storage room. With the help of Don Pedro and other vendors, we cleaned and prepared it. I called it El Taller de Races, the Roots Workshop, a place where Oaxacan art could flourish in the heart of Mexico City. I started giving small workshops on embroidery and alabrage painting. At first, only a few curious people came, but soon the classes filled up. There were people of all ages, fascinated by learning the ancestral techniques. It was incredible to see how the students' hands, at first clumsy, began to create beauty. Sharing my knowledge, my heritage, filled me with immense joy. My cousins and aunts in Oaxaca also benefited. I commissioned more pieces from them, paying them a fair price, and thus, the art of my people reached more corners of the city. El Taller de Races was not only a place of teaching, but also a meeting point. People came to learn, but also to hear the stories, to feel the connection with the culture. The market had become an ecosystem. My stall and my workshop were part of it, contributing to its diversity and cultural richness. The dignity of my work, which had once been questioned, was now a beacon attracting others. I had gone from being the outsider to being a teacher, an ambassador of my culture. Every day at the market was a celebration. The aroma of dried chilies and fresh flowers mingled with the smell of wet clay and cotton threads, creating a symphony of senses. I had found my purpose, not just in selling, but in sharing, in preserving and inspiring. My dream of bringing a piece of Oaxaca to the big city had come true. El Taller de Races became a landmark in the Mercado de San Juan. People came from everywhere to learn, to buy, and to hear the stories of Oaxaca. My cousins and aunts in the village were busier than ever, and their incomes improved significantly. I felt immense satisfaction, knowing that my success also benefited my community. One day, a journalist from a major city newspaper visited my stall in the workshop. She had heard about my story, about how a young Oaxacan woman had managed to thrive in the capital. She conducted a long and in-depth interview, asking me about my beginnings, the challenges, the discrimination, and the support I had received in the market. I spoke with an open heart. The article, published a few days later, was moving. It told my story with sensitivity, highlighting the importance of culture, the dignity of artisanal work, and resilience. Camila, the weaver of dreams from Oaxaca, the article was titled. The photos showed my crafts and my workshop, full of smiling students. The impact was immediate. My stall was filled with new customers, and my workshop received an avalanche of registrations. People wanted to meet the weaver of dreams. Fame, though unexpected, brought me a new responsibility. I knew that my story could inspire others not to give up in the face of adversity, to value their roots. I began giving talks at schools and universities, sharing my experience. I always emphasized the importance of perseverance, authenticity, and respect for all cultures. My stall neighbors, Dona Elena and Don Pedro, looked at me with a pride that moved me. Don Chewy, with his silent wisdom, always offered me a cup of herbal tea for my voice. The market was no longer a place of solitude, but a home. Every familiar face, Every greeting, every gesture of support, reminded me that I had found my place, my family in the big city. The root I had planted in the Mercado de San Juan had not only grown, but had expanded, weaving bonds with many people, carrying the message of dignity and culture. The afternoon sun filtered through the market roof, illuminating my stall and my workshop. The laughter of the students and the murmur of the customers filled the air. I had arrived in the big city with a suitcase full of crafts and a heart full of dreams. Now, my heart was full of gratitude and my life of purpose. The growing popularity of my workshop and my story led to a bold idea. Why not organize a festival of Oaxacan art and culture right in the Mercado de San Juan? I shared the idea with the market administration and my fellow vendors. At first, there was skepticism, but my enthusiasm and the success of my workshop convinced them. With the help of Don Chuy, Dona Elena, and Don Pedro, and the support of the administration, we began planning the Festival de los Races Oaxaqueñas, Festival of Oaxacan Roots. It would be an event to celebrate the culture, craftsmanship, and gastronomy of my state. We invited artisans from my village and other communities in Oaxaca to come and exhibit their products. The response was overwhelming. Everyone wanted to participate. On the day of the festival, the Mercado de San Juan transformed into an explosion of color, music, and aromas. Huipiles, alabrijes, black clay pottery, mole tlayudas, mezcal, all of Oaxaca was there. People flocked in droves. The market aisles were packed with visitors, fascinated by the cultural richness. Sales were extraordinary for all the artisans. We organized backstrap loom demonstrations, alabrije painting workshops, and traditional music and dance performances. The atmosphere was one of pure joy and celebration. I saw my cousins and aunts, their faces lit up with emotion, selling their pieces and sharing their stories. It was a dream come true, not just for me, but for my entire community. Amidst the bustle, I met the journalist who had written the article about me. She smiled, amazed by the market's transformation. "Camila," she told me, "this is incredible. You've created something magical here. You've brought the essence of Oaxaca to the capital." I felt a deep satisfaction. It wasn't just about selling, but about creating a space where culture was valued, where the dignity of indigenous peoples was celebrated. The festival was a resounding success. It showed that authenticity and cultural richness have an important place in the heart of the city. That night, as I helped my relatives pack, I felt immense gratitude. I had harvested much more than sales. I had harvested a sense of belonging, pride, and purpose. The Mercado de San Juan, which once seemed a place of indifference to me, was now the scene of a cultural triumph, a place where roots had spread and flourished. The Festival de los Races Oaxaqueñas became an annual event, eagerly awaited by the people of the city and the artisans of Oaxaca. My stall and El Taller de Races prospered. My life had changed dramatically. From being a young outsider struggling to survive, I had become a successful entrepreneur and a cultural ambassador. But the most valuable thing was not the money, but the connection. I had woven an invisible thread between my village and the big city, uniting cultures, breaking barriers. My crafts, which at first went unnoticed, were now sought after for their authenticity and the story they told. Each piece was a reminder of the dignity of manual labor and the richness of traditions. Don Chuy, Dona Elena, and Don Pedro continued to be my pillars in the market. Their smiles and words of encouragement were a constant reminder of the community that had welcomed me. One day, as I was arranging some new pieces, a young woman approached my stall. She was an art student, and her eyes shone with admiration. "Miss Camila," she said shyly, "your story inspires me so much. I'm also from a small village, and sometimes I feel like my art isn't valued." I smiled at her, recognizing in her the same uncertainty I had felt years ago. "Don't give up, Mija," I told her. "Your art has a voice. You just have to find a way to make it heard." I shared my experience with her, Don Chuy's advice, the importance of telling the story behind each piece. I saw her eyes fill with hope. That conversation made me realize how far I had come. I had transformed discrimination into an opportunity to educate, to inspire, to build bridges. The aroma of dried chilies and fresh flowers still filled the market air, but now, for me, it was the smell of resilience, community, and triumph. My hands, which at first trembled with uncertainty, now worked with the confidence of someone who knows their worth. They had molded clay, embroidered threads, and above all, had woven dreams. The circle of my story was complete. I had come to Mexico City seeking a place for my art, and I had found much more: a home, a family, and the opportunity to be a beacon for others. Dignity is not bought or sold. It is carried within, and sometimes it is shared so that others may also find it. And so, Camila, the girl from Oaxaca, continued to weave the invisible thread of hope in the heart of the great city.